I feel like there's the whole Tony Hinchcliffe debacle.
Yeah.
And I've been seeing. Do you know Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks?
Yes.
Yeah. She's been battling on Twitter about how, like or hate Trump, he's not a fascist or a Nazi. He's nothing like those things. And to me, it's a sign of how much things have changed.
Yeah.
Because it's opening the table up for substantive debate rather than kind of what's the word, like panic-driven name-calling.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed the Tony Hinchcliffe thing was mostly friends of mine who like hate what he did at the rally, but are still going to go to Kill Tony in a couple weeks because they have tickets and they still think he's funny. And they're like basically leftist friends of mine.
Right.
And it's this thing, it's like the world has dramatically changed in terms of sort of like the temperature and the anger of things surrounding Trump and conservatives and sort of right-wingness, I would say, in the last like year and a half.
Yeah, but that's and so that's what's making you feel optimistic. It's interesting. I mean, I guess I could see that.
That makes you feel pessimistic.
No, it's more of I guess I've been trying not to let any of it affect me just since 2016, because I was so affected by all that, without wanting to be. And so that's what I would attribute the temperature change to, is probably just the fact that, sadly, the baby boomers are passing on and getting older, and so the world that they lived in is becoming old-fashioned, and now we're getting older, and we are becoming the adults in the room, slowly, very slowly. And I think our perspectives are being reflected more in the mainstream because of that, which is like, when you think of the comedy that we grew up on, it was very raunchy and roast-centric and all that kind of stuff. And so I guess I feel like it's also, we're just also much more cynical because we've, we all saw Two Girls, One Cup when we were in 8th grade when we didn't want to, and we became, irrevocably changed and cynical.
Well, I never saw that, by the way.
Yeah,
I know
me
what
neither.
It is. I don't actually need to see it.
Yeah.
So do you see it that the boomer generation were the ones who were freaking out in 2020 about Trump, and it wasn't our generation?
Yes, it's still that way. I mean, my parents are still much more invested in the whole blue versus red, whereas us. The only thing that's blue versus red for us millennials is Halo 2, I mean, no, just kidding, sort of. Yeah, I think so.
I have a very different experience because, like, the people I know who, like, 2 years ago were posting on Facebook, like, unfriend me now, are now making jokes about it.
Oh, yeah? That's interesting.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying it's the same people
yes.
whose, like, temperature has come down.
Yes, and I agree. I think it's probably because you spend enough time on the internet, you're going to be a hypocrite, and so you kind of just have to realize that you're going to probably change your opinion. Because everybody's a hypocrite on the internet. You look back at anything you've probably posted. If you've been truly honest or not even truly honest, if you're just talking a lot on Twitter, you are going to contradict yourself at some point.
Sure.
So I feel like you just have to have, as time progresses and you learn, everybody's going to have more empathy because of that, because they realize that they can be dragged through the coals very easily. Yeah. But it's a question.
Yeah, maybe.
It's a question of where does it all go, I guess, is obviously.
Where does what all go?
Well, so yes, the temperature is going down, but I imagine as the technology and everything solidifies, we're going to find, I mean, we're already, I mean, and this kind of leads into the book, so we're going to finish up the cypherpunks, right?
Right.
Or The Freedom and the Future of the Internet by Julian Assange.
Right. Et al.
And and so it's a question of whether are the corporate overlords going to win, and will the internet just become a corporate sort of monopoly, or will there be room for nuanced voices like what we're seeing? It feels like we are at this interesting point where there was a lot of censorship even just 3 years ago, and people pushed back, and so now there's kind of less censorship, but it feels like we're still on the back foot. You know what I mean? And again, you had opened up last episode talking about how you were kind of pessimistic, like maybe cryptography was the way to fight against an authoritarian government in 2012 or 11, whenever they wrote this book. But that feels like it's far gone now. And part of me agrees with you, but also, and a lot of this is just from reading Reddit, honestly, is like, we have become Reddit quintessential Redditors. You know that.
That's the thing that I'm the most
pessimistic,
like black-pilled about.
That you're a Redditor now. You're a Redditor, whether you like it or not, Antushka.
I don't like it. I'm not impressed with the people on Reddit.
You'll slowly become them.
I am one of them. That's the thing. It means I'm unimpressive too.
Yeah. Well, it's self-aware. Me as well. But AI and quantum computing. I mean, these are two revolutionary things that are just going to disrupt so many industries. And I think
I don't know what quantum computing is, and I've read it. I've tried, and I don't understand what it.
Yeah,
like literally.
This is why we need to have Mr. T on. But
I think that there's a not 0% chance that we'll have him on, and he'll do his damnedest to explain it to me, and I still will have no idea what.
Well,
it
and I mean, it is complicated, and there's different types. I mean, there's software quantum computing, and then there's like the hardware. Like people are trying to make a quantum computing type system in using sort of the regular hardware, which is not quantum based, is binary, and that's really all it is. It's the idea that it's a probabilistic system instead of a more defined system, I guess you could say. Like you can have a state between 0 and 1 essentially, and you have a probability that it is 0 or 1. And I mean, this is where like my reaches of the system fails, because obviously there's probabilistic parts of our computers as they are now. When you're making transistors, it's like not all the transistors are going to work and stuff like that. But I think it's more about where the location of the electron is more probabilistic. And the idea is it's just there are certain algorithms that are much more easy to compute with this type of method. And so that's why, especially in cryptography, there's thoughts, or I think it's already being implemented in some companies, that it will make certain types of algorithms, cryptographic algorithms, very easy for a quantum computer to breach. So people are going to need to start to come up with ways to, defend against that. But we're at a point where that's not exactly, that hasn't happened yet.
I don't even understand how that is possible. I've been thinking about that all week too.
About what?
So like a cryptographic algorithm, even a really, really basic one. So like there's some kind of probability table to approximate randomness, right? Where I enter a one-digit integer and another one-digit integer comes out. And there's some like distribution of probability of whatever integer comes out. How can you know what the original integer was? Definitely. It seems impossible. even if you can test all sorts of different things, it doesn't matter. Like the one coming in and the one coming in isn't actually controlling what's coming out, other than it is an input.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think we could probably get into a pretty big rabbit hole on that. And I don't think I'm equipped to sort of describe all this.
I mean, maybe there is an answer, and I don't understand it. It just it doesn't seem possible to me.
Well, this is kind of the whole Schrodinger's cat thing, I think, is getting at that of and you know, it's all, you know, and the double slit, right? The idea that the observation is doing something to the output.
Like if I flip a coin, nothing about the outcome tells me what the state of the coin was before the flip. That's where I'm saying I don't even see how you can calculate that.
Yeah. No, I understand, and I don't have a good answer, but somebody does.
Right. Or they say they do. This is the thing, is I don't even get it, so I can't evaluate if what they're saying makes sense.
Fair enough. Well, yeah, no, but we'll get them on again.
Because actually, I was going to ask you about that, about some of the Reddit comments, and maybe we can do that at the end or something. But yeah, I
feel
have
like
a question.
We should do it at the end. I don't know. It's tough to know what people, and in some sense, who cares what people think. But I feel like it makes more sense to get into the book, and then we'll talk about the Reddit stuff at the end.
Okay, sounds good. It's related, obviously, because of the topics.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, and there, I mean, yeah. So these we essentially finished the book. Most of it.
Right.
And definitely recommend this to anybody that's interested in this stuff. It has a lot of, not a lot of technical stuff, but a lot of interesting philosophical points, which we'll obviously highlight right now. But yes,
or according to Reddit, really dumb.
Yeah, dude, that was hilarious. How many people just were like kind of upset they were like kind of upset to learn that Julian Assange is an idiot. It's like, yeah, I was having fun trolling people on those posts.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll talk about that. So the first thing, first chapter that we read, the internet and politics, right? And
what about the physics?
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes. Fighting total surveillance with the laws of physics. So in the last episode, we talked about fighting surveillance with the laws of man, which is essentially law, like coming up with laws to make it so that you don't get prosecuted for encrypting things and whatnot. And then, of course, the laws of physics. I feel like this is kind of getting at what we discussed last week, right? Which is basically just using the fact that though Redditors don't like to anthropomorphize the universe believes in cryptography. That was the big phrase that got everybody pissed off on Reddit. And of course, I think that Julian Assange is just being loose with the language there, and anybody that's not like super autistic understands that. But it's like, this is the problem, is people on Reddit just read things so literally. It's like, dude, just take a step back, have a cup of coffee, chew some gum, and
chew some gum.
Okay. We'll get there. So yeah, my understanding is this is just reiterating the fact that it's harder to decrypt than encrypt.
Right. There's some good points he makes throughout. At the beginning, the second page of the chapter, this is Julian Assange, where he's talking about how he's continuing on the line that the universe, smiles on cryptography. And he says that's the way you ensure that you don't have totalitarian regimes. People are armed, and if they are pissed off enough, then they simply take their arms and retake control by force. Whether that argument is still valid now is actually an interesting question, because of the difference in types of arms that has occurred over the past 30 years. We can look back to this declaration that code making, providing secret cryptographic codes that the government couldn't spy on, was in fact a munition. We fought this big war in the 1990s to try and make cryptography available to everyone, which we largely won. Which is an interesting idea, that he's saying that cryptography is available to everybody. And thinking about this in 2012, I'm wondering what it is he's thinking of and whether that still applies.
Yeah, well, I mean, they bring up the Tor browser a lot. I think that's probably one example, which is true. And yeah, I mean, I got the impression he was just saying, like, in theory, anybody has the ability to come up with an algorithm,
right.
You know. But this is where we can get into the whole thing of, you know, well, maybe this is why there is an incentive actually to make the U.S. population stupid. You know, and not teach them how to use computers and all this other stuff, which has essentially happened. And because then you won't have to worry as much about some random person coming up with a algorithm that you just don't know how to crack.
Right. I mean, from the perspective of this book, it's funny. Everybody uses computers like constantly, but they use them in the ways that give other people access to surveil them constantly, including us and what we're doing right now.
Yes. Yeah, because we don't have the technical knowledge.
Yeah, and most people are not using computers in a creative and cryptographic way. They're just sort of saying, yes, I will be surveilled all day
I've
long.
got nothing to hide. I mean, my dad...
Please surveil me.
Yeah, my dad says it all the time, honestly, not to call him out. But yeah, he's like, I don't have anything to hide. What do I care?
It doesn't matter, but you're right.
Yes.
And to me, my argument has nothing to do with whether you have anything to hide.
But I'm just saying...
I think that there's two things.
Yes.
It's somebody is benefiting and profiting off of you. They're essentially like stealing what could be your own value from you. And the second thing, which actually I was going to bring up later, but it's an old Soviet idea. And it's sort of unclear who said it, whether it's the head of the secret police or a judge or maybe Stalin. But it's essentially, give me the man and I'll give you the crime.
Right. And yes, and some might say...
And it's like, so yes, you do have things that everybody
Yeah, of course,
does.
yeah.
And modern cops talk about it. If they follow you on the street long enough, they're going to find something to pull you over for.
Yes. Yes, it's very true.
And so yes, you do have something to hide. You just don't know. You don't even know what you have to hide, but you definitely do.
Yes. Yeah, and that's a great point, because I mean, everybody is sort of breaking the law in ways they probably don't even realize it, in little mundane ways that
Well, there's so many laws and ordinances and whatever. Yeah.
Like sodomy.
Yes. Right. Constant. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And then further down, this actually addresses a Reddit point because I think this was 2 weeks ago. I don't remember if it was last week. I think it was 2 weeks ago. I quoted W. Dye's B-Money paper. And he starts off by talking about how this B-Money system or crypto anarchy actually doesn't allow for violence. And somebody commented that's like the dumbest, most naive thing they've ever heard in their life. But Jacob, in the book, addresses this, and he says, the force of nearly all modern authority is derived from violence or the threat of violence. One must acknowledge with cryptography, no amount of violence will ever solve a math problem. And they go on to discuss this, and it kind of explains a little bit what Wei Dai was getting at when he's talking about precluding violence, because you can beat somebody up to try and take their things from them. But if their things are sort of encrypted, no amount of physical force is going to get you through that encryption. They will either have to tell you, or you will have to solve the problem yourself.
Yes. And I understand, honestly, where the Redditor's coming from, because I think I even said that in the first episode when we read it. It is it feels overly idealistic, right? But you know, in some ways that's okay, because when you're trying to think about what you want a world to look like, it sort of makes sense to shoot for the moon. Yes, and obviously the idea makes sense, I think, at base, that you
can't beat up a computer to get information from it. It won't work.
Yes. But you can torture a human.
Your only option is to solve the math.
No, I mean, you could torture a human to try to get it.
Yeah, you could try and get somebody to give you the answer. Yeah, that he goes on to say that. He said, this is an important key. It doesn't mean you can't be tortured, and it doesn't mean they can't try to bug your house or subvert you in some way. But it means that if they find an encrypted message, it doesn't matter if they have the force of authority behind everything that they do. They still cannot solve the math problem.
Right. And I mean, kind of building on that, so at the end of that, this is after they've talked about sort of how, like, the BlackBerry phone was so instrumental in the Arab Spring and stuff like that, because it allowed people to talk to each other. And then it says, I think the only effective defense against the coming surveillance dystopia, so they definitely saw, that, obviously, because they were the ones, the whistleblowers, is one where you take steps yourself to safeguard your privacy, because there's no incentive for self-restraint by the people that have the capacity to intercept everything. So this is getting back to the point that you really need a grassroots kind of campaign of, I would say, cybersecurity education. Which that might be the one thing that the cypherpunks haven't done too well in recent ages, is because they have that in their initial manifesto, like they want to write code, they want to teach code and stuff like that. And granted, part of it's probably just because you have to kind of know somebody probably in the cypherpunks to get into the group, but it makes a good point that there probably should be more education out there for the regular person about how all of these systems work, the infrastructure of the internet. How does it work? What is the TCP, IP protocol and stuff like that? And, but it, that wasn't taught to me at all in public school. I mean,
No.
And I think they're probably getting, some people are like learning to code, but I just saw another person post in the C++ subreddit about how they work for a company where the government is like, I mean, who knows if this is true. A lot of people were commenting saying this sounds crazy and they haven't experienced this, but they work as a government contractor, and the government officials they were interacting with were forcing them to write in Rust instead of C++ because it's, quote, less dangerous, and by that they mean less. There's more infrastructure in place that deals with memory allocation in Rust. You have to think more about how you're allocating memory in C++ and even more in C, which is why they've slowly adapted these languages. But this is the point, is we're abstracting ourselves away. Python, I code in Python all the time, so nothing against Python, but it is an abstracted, object-oriented language that, you're really not getting a full understanding of how the computer works, because you're not actually being like, okay, I need to make an array this size and make sure that it's allocated. You're thinking about that a little bit, but it's not nearly as ground level. And so as we abstract ourselves away, then of course we'll be forever at the mercy of these systems.
Right.
Yeah. Let me get off my podium.
Well, no, it's good. Did you have anything else from that chapter?
No, I thought that was a pretty quick chapter, and I got a lot of other stuff to say about the other one, so I'm all for moving on. All
right, the internet and politics.
Yeah, I mean, this one, I think, first off, the first thing to discuss is the ACTA, the Anti-Counterfeiting Trade Agreement, because this is something they harped on a lot. I'd never heard of this, but they're kind of talking about this as like central to what is allowing a lot of the nation states around the world to kind of create this cabal, in some sense, to take down anybody that wants to advocate for privacy and cryptography. So like Jeremy says on page 68, I think we hackers have a responsibility towards the tools we build and hand out to the rest of the world, and we may be witnessing the beginning of how efficiently this responsibility can be put into action when we use it collectively. Today in the EU, there is an ACTA debate. ACTA, as I said, the Anti-Counterfeiting Trade Agreement, is a multinational treaty that is the blueprint for SOPA and PIPA. So SOPA and PIPA are the in the U.S. are the Stop Online Privacy Act, and PIPA is the Protect IP Act, which were violent copyright legislations that basically gave Hollywood the power to order any internet company to restrict access and to censor the internet. That's in Jeremy's words.
Yep.
And so he's actually kind of optimistic here because he's saying for the first time, we were showing them articles in the rules of procedures of the European Parliament that apparently they were looking at for the first time and told them how to behave. And there was the vote that we won by 21-5, which marginalized the British rapporteur in a small corner. But yeah, they're basically saying this is a small procedural point on the way towards defeating it, this monstrous global agreement that has been designed behind our backs to circumvent democracy itself. But we may, as citizens, be able to kill this monster easily with the internet tools and mailing lists and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But I would say the point is that there, as they've already discussed, the four horsemen of the information apocalypse, which we detailed last time, counterfeiting, right? CP, human trafficking, and then drugs. But I would say there's another one to add to this that they discuss a lot here, which is basically private property.
Right.
Which actually I kind of wanted to get your opinion on because this is something actually Mark and I, or Brother X, discussed when we're during one of the episodes you were gone. We read some patent stuff.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, they come out actually almost communistic in how they talk about private property because they're basically saying private property and IP is also one of the things being used to essentially censor people on the internet and get people to to surveil people, on the back of Napster.
I think I missed the private property part. I definitely get that with IP.
Well, IP is. I'm using private property loosely here to be like...
Because I personally am pro-private property, but anti-IP.
Yeah, but I would say in my head, and of course there's probably lawyers out there that would like scream at this, but I look at it very loosely as like private... IP is a subset of private property. It's something you come up with that you're saying is yours.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I think IP is in direct opposition to private property. I don't think you can have both properly. I don't think you can have both properly.
Can you expand on that?
IP, if IP is in place, it supersedes physical property rights. I consider private property to be in the physical realm. And so, for instance, copyright is saying that I literally may not use my own pen and paper. I do not have the right to copy with my own property some set of words or something like that.
Yes.
So I would say that I believe in property rights as in this is my pen, this is my paper, I can do whatever the hell I want with it. Intellectual property says no, you can't, because this idea supersedes that.
But I would say in all of these areas, and you're probably not going to like this, where it's all dealing with ideas and obviously consciousness. I won't go down that road. But the point is that you need to the fact that you own the pen and paper is an idea also. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
And so it's an abstraction in some sense is kind of what I'm getting at. It's just IP is maybe two abstractions. It's a second abstraction. It's an abstraction on top of an abstraction. But
right. Yeah. Right. I do not. So if I have a definition of property in my mind, ideas of non-physical nature do not fit into that category.
But what if that physical...
everything is an idea. Yeah. Everything is discourse. That's fine. But that destroys all conversation. So then conversation over.
Yeah, I don't know, because, then you obviously can put writing into a physical... I mean, writing is physical from the moment that we say it, right? It vibrates our physical vocal cords and everything like that. And
writing?
Well, speaking, and which is, words. Sure. But the point is, it's like you have to engage the physical reality to put out even what do we want to call it? Language.
Right, but a song is an idea, singing is an action.
A song is in some ways just a ordered sequence of sound waves.
Well, ordered in our brains, not ordered.
Ordered in reality.
Like ordered by what?
Ordered in reality that our brains interpret.
But songs aren't real. It's like it's not a picture of an apple.
Are.
It's just paint
they're
on
sound
a
waves.
No. A song is just made up in your head.
So
you are saying, I hear this and this, and I'm going to put them together and relate them. And so you hear the person singing.
You're getting exactly.
And you make that the song, and then you hear a bird tweeting, and that's not part of the song.
But you're getting exactly at my point with private property is that you're engaging, like nobody, like. Until you claim something as yours, it's not really yours. And even after that, I mean, this is why people push against private property as a concept. It's like you could make, I think, the same argument that private property isn't really.
Yeah, I think that there are reasonable questions about private property as a whole. I don't see them as addressing any of them in this. I think that you can address intellectual property separately, and maybe I missed something.
Yeah, I think you missed it. I think they definitely talked about it. Let me find it.
About physical property?
About copyright. No, not about private property. At least I don't think. Let me find.
Right.
Yeah, the history of the human race and history of culture is the history of copying thoughts, modifying and processing them further on. And if you call it stealing, then you're like all the cynics. That's what Andy says.
Right. But I don't know. Obviously, we can't ask them. I highly doubt that they do not believe in any concept of theft. Because they're talking about copyright, and they're talking about idea exchange.
Yeah, I mean, they're talking
versus
in the context...
like stealing a TV or something like that. That's not what they're talking about.
Well, yeah, I mean, but again, this is where there are people who look at those equivalently, which is why we have laws that look at... I mean, this is on the back of them talking about Napster, right? So...
Right, but that's also not stealing physical property.
Again, a case could be made and is made in the courts that copyright is physical because it's an ordered sequence of sound waves.
It's not. No. It's not physical. It's intellectual property legally. That's why that's why it has a different designation.
I know, but I'm telling you, it has a physical basis in physics. It is an ordered sequence of sound waves. That yes, your brain interprets, but your brain interprets that pen is yours. It's the same thing.
Okay, I just don't agree.
Well, that's fine. But, yeah, I think you're missing it.
I also don't agree that a song is an ordered series of sound waves.
Well, there's some order to it. I mean, I agree that you can have, obviously different iterations of a song.
Or it's not a particular order.
Well, there's something in the order of the sound waves that says that, oh, this is this song.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
Maybe.
Well,
I don't.
How would you know that one song is...
Maybe it's the order of the sound waves. I don't know.
How would you know that, Iron Man is a cover if there wasn't some thing in it that is some eigenvector that is defines the song? There's obviously...
How would you know it's a cover? Well, because you've heard it before, so you recognize a pattern like what you're saying.
What's the pattern? Is it an ordered sequence of sound waves?
I don't know. That...
Maybe Zoom is mad at us because we're arguing.
No, I'm out of space on my computer, I guess. Dang it. Here. I wonder if I can change where Zoom records to.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's see if this works. We'll see.
So, we got cut off.
An ordered series of sound waves or something like that. It's not that I don't think what you're saying is... It's not like it's crazy or out of left field. It's maybe the specific phrasing I'm getting hung up on.
Oh, that's fine, and we're probably going down a rabbit hole. There's a lot of interesting things to discuss. So what I'm trying to get at, and I do agree that there is obviously a distinction between IP and copyright, or IP and private property, in the level of abstraction. I will grant you that. And I'll grant you that in this case, they're talking about IP and copyright.
Right.
But
I guess from a Judith Butler perspective, there is no difference.
Yeah.
Because a piece of paper is just as abstract as an equation.
Yeah, and I guess I'm coming from the annoying postmodernist perspective right now.
Right. And I just think the thing is, to me, we talked about this before, it's just wrong and it's just dumb. It is lazy in a way of me to say that, but I think it is also, it is conflating things to the point of obfuscation.
Yeah, I don't know, because I think in this case it is an interesting point, because there are times where you want to be able to say, like, okay, this is mine, or at least I came up with this, but then it becomes a question of, well, how much should you get compensated for that? And then when you get the state involved, it gets tricky.
Right.
And in music, this is a really difficult thing that I don't agree with, actually, a lot of the copyright laws in music. I think that there should be a lot more nuance in the fact that, first off, there's only so many ways that you can configure chords and whatnot, and notes and everything, and rhythms. And really every probably melody has been done in some sense, like every short sequence. I mean, you can break down all the intervals in the Western music down to 12, right? So there's only going to be a set number of steps that you can take. Right. But anyway, I'm not saying that.
I think we're not even close to exhausting it. But
no, but there is a lot of there's a lot of new stuff that can be done with old ideas.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think that's what true. They're getting at in this. Why saying, like, in the case of Napster, also they were making the point that, Napster actually helped a lot of musicians because it exposed them to a bunch of music that they wouldn't have ever heard, and then they went out and they supported the musician, which is basically what the business model has become for music now, is that, you make your money as a touring musician, and it's more just like advertising is the streaming.
I mean, in a way, that's always been it, because that was the complaint with CDs in the 90s, too, that artists made pennies on the dollar, or fractions of penny.
Right.
I don't think artists have ever made any money off recorded music.
And that's the other great point, is that the people that were really mad about the copyright weren't even the musicians, unless it was Lars.
Right. Well, except Metallica.
I was just about, unless it was Lars.
Lars.
But he'll never live that down. But yeah, I mean, it was mostly just the people behind the scenes that, everybody really didn't want them to make any money anyway, because they're greedy and they've exploited people.
Yeah. But they won, I think, ultimately.
Maybe. I don't know if they did, because, I mean, you don't make nearly as much money off of managing a band now that you did 20 years ago. I mean...
Sure.
Record companies are hemorrhaging cash and laying people off.
Right, but I think that's for other reasons. I don't think that's because Napster won.
No, but it changed the business model. Napster obviously died, but it did.
Right.
It did push us towards the streaming model. They were like, okay, we need to come up with a way to deal with this, and streaming was the one that won out, I think, because it's cost effective and it's still giving people some money.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know though. I don't know. I just thought that was interesting because, that quote was interesting. Because it does come off a little bit like I said, kind of hippy dippy a little bit, which I'm all for in some sense.
They're computer guys. Computer guys used to be hippy dippy guys.
Well, but that's the interesting thing. They're computer guys, but they have this very strong anarchic component, which is very intriguing. I mean, I don't think they'd call themselves that, but I think what they're doing is very anarchistic.
Right.
Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I do. I think so.
So, yeah, and so this other quote I have, I think that if we manage that, I think that if we manage that, one, we have a strong case for exposing to the rest of the world that this is a horrible sentence, but I guess they were talking. Okay, this is still talking about the ACTA. This is Jeremy. Yeah, so he's talking, how, this is stealing and this is killing everybody, killing actors, killing Hollywood, killing cinema, killing kittens and everything. So they've won the battle in the past, and now we may be about to win the ACTA battle. And I once again have to disagree with the devil's advocate Julian was playing earlier. ACTA has been the greatest example of the circumvention of democracy so far, of sitting on the face of Parliament and the international institutions, sitting on the face of public opinion, and imposing unacceptable measures through the back door. And then he goes on to say, I think that if we manage that, one, we have a strong case for exposing to the rest of the world that the sharing of knowledge, the sharing of information makes things better, that we have to promote it and not fight it, and that any attempt, whether it's legislative or from a dictator or from a company, to hurt our ability to share information and share knowledge in a decentralized way must be opposed, period. I think we can build momentum. So he's basically saying that this is what people are pushing up against, is this idea of not letting people share information. And of course goes against the whole open source code projects in the computer sort of field. And this is why I liked Arch Linux. I mean, you can work on Arch Linux and just random people around the world are making packages all the time. So it's, it's the bleeding edge distribution. So yeah, I just think it's important to reiterate.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I think that makes sense. This whole part of the conversation reminds me of a funny argument, to bring up the same person I brought up a couple episodes ago, buying a beer with Bitcoin. I don't have a bleep machine.
That's okay.
So I can't bleep out his name or the other person.
We should get some sound effects.
We should.
A soundboard.
But Jeremy is talking about later when he says the artists are going to die because there won't be cinema anymore. Therefore, we have to go to give Hollywood power to censor the internet. And it's this idea, this happens all the time, and it's not even just with Hollywood, but whenever there's an attempt to dismantle some kind of system that is providing a large amount of power to a big organization, the argument against it is that people are going to die, or that people aren't going to be able to pay for things, And this happens with, minimum wage or something like that. The idea of eliminating minimum wage is people are going to starve to death. When really what minimum wage is doing is it is making it so that places like West Virginia stay poor while places like New York and Chicago stay very wealthy.
Look at Mr. Milton Friedman over here.
Right, exactly. But this reminds me because this same guy who bought a beer with Bitcoin in 2012 or whatever also gave a talk in our composition seminar about being anti-intellectual property. And it was pretty funny because the professor, who is very left and essentially just like a mouthpiece for the Democratic Party at the moment, in a very strange way, asked him, not knowing what his political position was, to discuss, for us composers, about intellectual property. And I think this professor was thinking he would give, a talk about, joining BMI and making sure to get all your rights payments and all that stuff. And he gave a presentation sort of against intellectual property and how ultimately it's hurting all sort of young and small name composers in the name of profiting giant companies like BMI and like the entire copyright industry.
Right.
And this professor like flipped out and started like screaming at him, got all red, was like, that's it. You've dismantled all of Western civilization. Congratulations. All of your friends won't be able to live. Like, we're all going to starve to death.
Wait.
It was an insane situation.
That is crazy. This isn't the person that died, right?
No.
Okay.
Nope, this person's still alive.
Okay.
Still teaching.
Okay. Well, we'll keep the names out then.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. No, I mean, certainly a lot of people think that, and I think to a degree, I do think private property certainly has underpinned the West in a way. We've talked about that previously, but it is also interesting because, again, this patent law stuff that my brother and I read back in December for the podcast was talking kind of about that, how actually nations really only care about copyright when they have IP. You know, whereas so like the U.S. didn't care about IP in the 19th century because they didn't have as much, versus the British Empire did, and so they explained this example of how the U.S. like a lot of U.S. authors were essentially just stealing British novels and reprinting them and selling them in the U.S. And then as the U.S. built up and became more powerful and started inventing things, then of course they strengthened the IP laws. But then now you see China is kind of in the same way. It's like they didn't care as much when they were they didn't have as much to guard against, and they were all for just stealing the U.S. IP and everybody else's IP. My family's been directly affected by that, in fact. But I'm sure in 20 years or even now, it's probably it's starting to change because they're actually now coming up with their own IP, and so now they're going to care about it. So I mean, that's how I thought that was a great way and simple way of looking at it that I think makes perfect sense. If you have IP, then you're probably going to want to protect it. Just like if you have property, you're going to want to protect it. And if you don't have those things, you don't care, and you're going to want to probably steal it. Because you're going to...
Well, maybe. I don't want to steal it. I have IP.
Yeah, sure, you don't. You don't want to steal it and you have IP. That's exactly the point.
No, but I don't care if it's stolen from me.
Oh, you don't care if it's stolen from you. Oh, yeah.
No. I mean, I care a little bit, but I don't... It's not a legal issue from my perspective.
Yeah, no, but it gets into this question about like cover songs too, is where it's like in some ways having people cover your songs is actually good promotion for you, and it gets your song into the zeitgeist, and I would say it's actually a more powerful form of advertisement than just like blasting people with ads on Instagram and stuff, because it is a grassroots way of doing it, and it's a more natural way.
It's also real engagement.
Exactly. But obviously there's plenty of people that have an issue with people covering. But yeah, I mean, I've thought about this, and maybe I'll eat these words at some point, but I'll go on the record and say it's like, I don't think I would ever sue anybody that was that covered my songs. I mean, I would like recognition, but like at the end of the day, what can I do? I mean, I can sue them, but I don't. I just would never sue anybody, I think, unless I really had to, and it was really egregious. So I'll add that stipulation in there for the future.
I think that there's especially with a lot of those music lawsuits, which is a little bit off topic.
No,
I think that there's weird implications that my guess is the people who are doing the lawsuits aren't thinking about, and they're just trying to get extra money or something like that. Well, but like suing Ed Sheeran for a vibe.
And who was that? That was his family. It was Marvin Gaye, right? His family? Yeah. So I mean, that's the other thing. It's not even the artist.
But the implication, if that actually won, the implication of that would be
ridiculous.
Crazy for music.
Everybody would be sued.
Everybody would be sued, and it would be so limiting to creativity. I mean, this is the thing, is all of these, and I don't know if they addressed it like this specifically in the book, but any type of copyright or any type of regulation of that sort is, at least, in a narrow sense, and with large-scale copyright laws in a very broad sense, limiting competition. It's the same thing as a tariff. It's the same thing as minimum wage laws. It is limiting competition. And something like creativity is a difficult and sort of unfortunate thing to try and limit competition in it, because creativity isn't actually a finite resource. it's not the same as water.
Well, yeah, definitely not the same as water.
So there are arguments and there's reasons, even amongst like Milton Friedman style or like libertarian folks, that regulations on finite resources sometimes might make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And people argue about it. That's not an agreed upon thing. But what tends to be agreed upon is that regulating a non-finite resource will only cause problems.
Right. I think that's an interesting, and it makes sense that you would break it into those. Obviously, I could come up with annoying ways that creativity is finite, but I won't do that right now because I think we've gotten into.
I don't think it's finite within the standard scope of the law.
Sure, and for all intensive purposes, it is essentially infinite. But yeah, that's getting into a rabbit hole. And yeah, there are, like, I keep coming back. There's a lot of interesting, as you said, gems in this.
Right.
Like, I really like this quote at the end of the chapter. They quote Benjamin Bayert, and he was saying basically the printing press taught the people how to read, the internet taught the people how to write. I like that quote. Mm-hmm. This is something very new. This is a new ability for everybody to be able to write and express themselves. And, you know, they talk about how, you know, obviously people aren't going to express themselves well, but it's true. It's like now everybody has a platform to sort of say whatever they want. And a lot of people will hate that. But I actually am of the opinion that even though there's a lot of growing pains that we're going through right now, this is, on the whole, good for us. It's making us more self-aware as a population. Mm-hmm. And as evidenced by the beginning of our talk, I mean, that's essentially what the point I was making when you were saying, like, you're seeing these people who 2 years ago were saying off with their heads if they like Trump, and now they're making jokes about it and stuff like that.
Right.
And that's the thing, is because when you step away, all of this political rhetoric is stupid at the end of the day. I mean, you know, and it's the whole trite thing. None of these people really care about you and stuff like that.
Right.
And so to really just get this heated about something is stupid. I'll say that again. It's stupid. And not just good for anybody. And if you come across saying that, like, I'm going to hate somebody that you know in person because they like somebody that you guys don't know and have never met, I mean, everybody's an idiot in that situation.
Right.
In my opinion.
And you're nice.
But I'm an idiot too, so what the hell do I know?
Right.
Cool. Okay, so the internet and economics, if we can move on. I don't know if you have any other stuff, but I thought this was probably the chapter I wanted to talk the most about.
I'm trying to see if the bit. I think towards the end of the chapter we're still on, they talk about how information essentially should be free. Knowledge and information, which is, we've been talking about open source and things like that, and what to encrypt and what should be free. And this is where I agree. And, you know, it's kind of like on the intellectual property line. And yeah, maybe they think all televisions also. Mm-hmm. Could be.
Yeah, I don't know. It was just making me think.
I'm not saying they don't. It's possible. Yeah. There are people who do, so it's not crazy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but who's speaking here? This is Jeremy again. Jeremy. That nice French spelling. I think that if we what is he talking about?
How have we already been going an hour? That's crazy.
Yeah. And we're working towards so he's talking about getting, battling this act, working towards that some members of the European Parliament now understand that when individuals share things, when they share files without profit, they shouldn't go to jail, they shouldn't be punished. I think that if we manage that one, we have a strong case for exposing to the rest of the world that sharing of knowledge. The sharing of information makes things better, and that we have to promote it and not fight it. And that any attempt, whether it's legislative or from a dictator or from a company, to hurt our ability to share information and share knowledge in a decentralized way must be opposed, period. So what's interesting about this to me is it makes me think of all of our sort of structures that we build to silo information and knowledge behind like paywalls and degrees and all sorts of things like that. But at the same time, we also have this flood of information on YouTube and just the internet generally. And there's an interesting tension there. Because like a mechanic wants to have special information on how to fix your car. But most things you can actually just look up and figure out how to do yourself now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's, what do they call it? The democratization, right? I mean, yeah, it's the printing press on steroids. It's the down with the guilt system. Although we got a weird guilt system being made again.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think that's interesting. And yes, I think the crux of this chapter was about just this idea of open source and freedom of flow of information unimpeded by a government, authority.
Right. I mean, it's an interesting ethic that knowledge and information should be free. Because it's something I very much agree with. And like we've talked about it before, it's sort of with respect to grouchy Reddit communities that don't like freely sharing information. And say you should figure it out for yourself. And I think about that too, because that can also be a good teaching tool.
Yes.
Not always giving your student the answer, but making them find the answer themselves. That's not a bad thing.
No. And this is why ChatGPT is so, in some ways, dangerous. I'm a proponent of it, or AI, large language models generally. But yeah, I mean, it's just, this is why you'll see people saying, like, I studied computer science and used ChatGPT, and I feel like I don't know anything. Because if you're constantly asking somebody how to do something, you're not thinking through it yourself and learning.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting point, because actually, so you ran out of space on your computer, and we stopped, and we had a little bit of off the record discussion about how you were having a hard time finding a Mac that had a lot of space. And actually, Julian Assange actually talks about this in this chapter. I forgot about this. He says there's a tendency within the shift there's a tendency within the shift to cloud computing that is quite worrying. There are enormous clusters of servers all in one location because it is more efficient to standardize control of the environment, to standardize the payment system. It is a competitive technique because piling up servers in the one location is cheaper than spreading them out. Most of the communication that occurs on the internet, except for streaming movies, is between server and server. So if you put the servers closer together, it is cheaper. We end up with these big hives of communicating servers. It makes sense for Google, for example, to put its servers near the big content providers, or the other way around, because the pages are indexed by Google to be searchable. So there are huge buildings in the U.S. that are just completely filled with servers from many different companies. That's where the NSA places some of its mass interception collection points. There you go. Right. The internet could exist without this centralization. It's not that the technology is impossible. It's just that it is simply more efficient to have it centralized. In economic competition, the centralized version wins out. So I don't know about. I mean, I get where he's coming from with the end, but it's. But that
right. Walmart will always be cheaper than starting your own store.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, I thought that's a very interesting and sort of very good breakdown of just how servers work. Again, just something that like the everyday people should understand how this is working, and we just don't, because there's don't.
It's files stored on computers.
Right.
Your computer too could be a server.
Yes, exactly. But then, can we move on to the next chapter? Because this gets into the whole infrastructure point again. And so I thought this was a very good chapter, because it talks about the 3 ingredients of a state. I wanted to get your opinion on this.
Yes.
So Assange opens with saying that the 3 ingredients of a state are essentially military control, communication control, and finance control. And it's interesting because it opens up specifically with Hezbollah as the example, and Hassan Nasrallah, who of course was just assassinated like 2 weeks ago. But I guess Assange had talked to him. Yeah, Julian apparently interviewed him like 15 years ago. And they are making the point that Hezbollah, in some sense, is a state because it has all these things, and I guess it even had its own fiber optic cables that were laid down.
Right.
Yeah, and so I thought this was a great chapter because it's explaining all the ways that we really are in some ways. If you want to be pessimistic, this is the chapter to read because this is telling you exactly how sort of strangulized we are by the state and how, I mean, it does feel like without your own infrastructure to communicate, without your own fiber optic cables or some other method of communicating, you will always, like, encryption isn't the answer. It won't be the answer because you'll always be at the whim.
There's a physical barrier.
There's a physical barrier.
Yeah.
And in some cases, I've also said in the statist, defense of like, the government helped put these things up. So they, in some sense, that's how they are able to say like, yes, we are allowed to, guard against these things.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it is common. Like if I help my neighbor weed their garden, I can then say from now on, I have rights to listen into your house.
You're damn right. You do.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And watch them.
Yeah, right.
Don't forget to scrub under the under the armpits, under the shoulders. But I mean, a lot of interesting points in here. First off, I didn't realize I was looking up Applebaum, Jacob Applebaum. He was like 28 here. He was really young. Yeah. He's like only 41 right now.
But he's great. He's a whippersnapper.
He is.
Fighting with them.
He's a whippersnapper. Yeah. And but he explains this horrific experience where he got detained in Canada, and they just it's like, it just makes you remember how as soon as you start to push up against these systems, they show you how horrible they really are as soon as you start to ask questions. And, so don't be surprised if you start to get some phone calls, Antushka.
Yeah.
Good thing you don't go anywhere.
Right. Yeah. It's it is kind of depressing.
But what
I think it's important though to the idea that Hezbollah can in some ways be considered a state, and there's also other parts of this chapter where they talk about a mafia and a state being sort of tantamount. They work in approximately the same way. And I think what it is it illuminates something that, especially in the West, we don't think about, because we assume that our governments are these sort of enshrined structures that have always been, and they're like basically good, and something like Hezbollah is basically illegitimate, and they don't even know what they're doing, this like ragtag thing. And I think that there is truth to that. I mean, I have family that was just living in Lebanon, and they have moved out of Lebanon, and dealing with Hezbollah, controlling the power grid is a problem, because the power goes out for several hours every day, and the power company acts like a mafia, and it's just a mess. So it's not like I think that Lebanon is running as smoothly as the U.S. is, but to say that Hezbollah is at least almost functioning as a state makes perfect sense.
Right.
And it shows you where states come from and how they can be formed. And I think that something like the United States, at least in myth, had a particularly sort of organized inception.
Right. Well, so do you agree with those ingredients? I mean, they're kind of like what Milton Friedman almost was saying, like the need of the government is. He said defense, right? What was it? Defense? I don't remember, but yeah. Defense was one of them.
So like defense of borders, enshrinement of rights, and then like extra protection for those special cases of people who aren't able to protect their own rights.
Right. So
disabled people, children, things like that.
So I guess he's really just dealing more with the force aspect, but the communication and the finance, what do you think about that?
So the state, a state has to control those things in some way.
Well, and moreover, that they are ingredients of a state. Like, you won't have a state
control of
if
finance.
You don't have those.
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't feel definitional to me, but I could imagine a state that does not control those things.
What is the definition of a state for you then? Because, I mean, and the reason I'm asking, and I'm not saying if you don't have a good answer right now, that's fine. The reason I'm asking, though, is because given your anarchic views, it does seem to me that having a very good working definition would be important.
Yeah, my definition of a state would be a corporation that enforces a monopoly on use of violence or physical force in some way.
Right.
So a mafia would be, at least locally, a state.
Yeah.
Like the way that the mafia existed in the South Boston in the 50s through the 80s is acting as a state, because it not only says it's the only one who's allowed to do violence in these neighborhoods, it also provides protection to the businesses in those neighborhoods. It cleans up the streets in some ways. It's a complicated relationship the Boston Mafia had with South Boston. It's not like it was everything it did was just dripping with evil down to the bone. It was acting as we are in charge. It was acting as the state for that area.
Right.
Like insurrectionist within the borders of the United States, kind of, in a
right, which is why they were taken out.
So I think in that case, I think it's right, but I don't think that you have to control currency. The mafia did not control currency in that situation, and I don't think that you have to control communication, because I'm sure they didn't have specific control of the phone lines and stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, and so another sort of philosophical point they get in this chapter is they have a little bit of a disagreement where I think it's Jacob Appelbaum is sort of arguing that control of communication and finance are the same thing.
That was the first thing I thought when I read Assange's breakdown of the three things needed for freedom, because to me, control of communication and economic freedom are approximately the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that later he says that that's how an American would conceptualize it. And I was oh, they got me. Dang it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think I do see that point, because finance is just a method of communicating in some sense.
It's kind of what we were talking about the other day with a crypto technology for communication could also be a cryptocurrency.
Right.
They could be the same thing.
Right. Yeah. So those are just some points I thought were good to highlight.
Yep.
I don't know if you have anything else from that.
I mean, little scary things. Thinking about conceptualizing Visa, MasterCard, any digital payment system is a surveillance system.
Thank you. Yes, that's a great point. There's a quote Andy has. There was this very interesting thing from the WikiLeaks cable also that said that the Russian government tried to negotiate a way that Visa and MasterCard payments from Russian citizens within Russia would have to be processed in Russia, and Visa and MasterCard actually refused it. And then Julian says, yes, the power of the U.S. Embassy and Visa combined was enough to prevent even Russia from coming up with its own domestic payment card system within Russia. And then Andy's saying, meaning that even payments from Russian citizens within Russia to Russian shops will be processed through American data centers. So the U.S. government will have jurisdictional control, or at least insight. And then I yes.
Right.
So when Putin goes to buy a Coke, 30 seconds later, Washington, D.C. will know. And and I mean, it puts a little bit in perspective this basically fissure in the world that we're seeing now, where, I mean, we've effectively created two different worlds with the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. And by we, I mean, I guess, some would argue Russia did it, right? But I just mean that by enforcing the sanctions that we did, we have kind of forced Russia to come up with their own systems like BRICS and everything. This was the accelerator for all of that stuff. And yeah, I mean, this is where, it becomes very interesting. And I think I do kind of actually think that government shouldn't have sort of all the control of the data processing power in the world. So obviously I wouldn't have liked this to come about from the Ukrainian war, but it seems like it is only natural that there would be a bifurcation event from a unipolar world to a multipolar world like this, because people aren't going to put up with a centralized control like this. And they shouldn't put up with it. And the fact that, it's like, it's true. We don't talk about Visa and MasterCard enough. There's really nobody, people like are talking about like State Street, Vanguard, BlackRock, but you never hear Visa and MasterCard.
Yeah, that's true.
And why is that?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Right, and then you get into crazy situations like somebody makes the regime upset enough, like an Alex Jones, and then they are no longer able to bank or use credit within the entire Western financial system.
Which is a way of suppressing their speech. I mean, then that gets back to the whole point. Like, I think that a savvy enough lawyer and a honest enough judge would agree that this is a suppression of speech by debanking people. And
have they won yet?
Well,
I don't think so.
No, they haven't. And I was going to say, I mean, we talk about people rather on the internet talk about Alex Jones as kind of the first example of that really debanking. But I mean,
wasn't Roseanne Barr also debanked?
Was she? I don't know. But
I think so. I think she's kicked off Visa, and I think Bank of America dropped her as a client. And there's other people, like people whose infractions, like compared to Alex Jones, feel like nothing.
Right, because they're not famous. And well, I was going to say though that really, I mean, probably even before this, but like you could say WikiLeaks is the first example of this, even before them, because they were being debanked after this. I mean, and they talk about that in this book. Of
at least WikiLeaks is an organization. Like doing it to
a person,
to an individual is it's a bold move.
It is. Although I feel like they must have effectively done that to Assange. I imagine.
I think so. I just mean in optics, doing it to an organization versus to an individual.
I agree. And of course, I'm sure there were people debanked before this too. I mean, it is the logical tactic you would use if you had no other options as an authority. And we're really trying to destroy somebody, but it is a slippery slope. And again, I think a argument could be made that it is suppression of speech. But they would say, you're still able to speak, you just don't get the megaphone.
Right. And this is where I say
it's not your decision to make.
Right. This is where what I'm saying is that this is where I start to feel like we've lost, because by entrenching ourselves in the system of, the Federal Reserve having a monopoly on printing currency, then the credit and financial institutions having a monopoly on storing and using that currency. If you upset them enough, there's nothing you can do, because it's kind of even legally tenuous whether or not you can go around creating a crypto economy, essentially.
Well, and actually,
and they talk about a case, the e-gold thing, where I think when it's like these altcoins that are kind of being traded weirdly, and it's not a real economy. They're not. Nobody's using it to purchase electricity from an alternative electric provider that accepts altcoins or something like that. That, I think, is where the government would step in and say, no.
Yeah, no, I agree. And yeah, I mean, this is actually exactly to your point. They talk about Bitcoin also, which I thought was interesting. Not surprising, obviously, but if Julian Assange is debanked, he's probably very happy because I'm sure he got Bitcoin very cheap.
Right.
But yes, we were even talking about this like 2 episodes ago, and you were like, of course they would prosecute Satoshi if they knew him, and they make that exact point in this too. I mean, they're like, it makes sense that Satoshi would be anonymous because look what they did to the people of e-gold. They prosecuted them. And yeah, although then that's, again, could also lend credence to how it's a psyop, because they also talk about how it's like Bitcoin's great, but it has all of the, it's private, but it's not anonymous, right? So,
right. Wait. It's private. It's public, but it is anonymous.
It's private in that it is not clear who exactly are making the transactions, but you can see that people are making transactions. Like a fully anonymous thing, in my understanding, is how it was defined, is that you don't even know people are making transactions, and there's no way, which is what Monero and CryptoNote is. So it's private because your identity isn't directly linked publicly.
Okay. I think we're saying the same thing. No. I would flip it and say it's public, but it is anonymous.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is I think this is a definition and maybe we should look this up, because I think...
Because Bitcoin says it has a public ledger.
Yes.
But the transactions are anonymous.
Yes, but hang on. Let's see. Because I'm pretty sure these words have special meanings in the crypto universe. So let me just... Right. Let's just get it straight. Okay, so this is from a... what is this? 1-inch network. I don't know. So privacy and anonymity are related but still different. While anonymity intentionally keeps a user's identity hidden, privacy implies that their personal data should not be available to the general public. However, authorities might have the right to access the information under reasonable circumstances. So...
Right.
Yeah, so by design, blockchain technology offers privacy while remaining legally compliant and increasingly transparent. Public blockchain's designs implies that all transactions are accessible to users while personal information is never revealed. The data is public only in the sense that everyone can see a transaction status and other details, such as transaction time or sending and receiving addresses. Transparency ensures security, blah, blah, blah. In other words, most blockchains are essentially pseudo-anonymous rather than fully anonymous. Nevertheless, blockchain addresses reveal their owner's identity only if the owner has passed KYC, a verification process. So, yes. Whereas, like I said, CryptoNote and Monero are anonymous as well because they completely obscure your identity.
Right.
Yeah. And so this is what they point out in Bitcoin, though, is that it has these issues. It's private but not anonymous, so it could be possible for an authority to trace back and figure out who's doing things.
But how? This is a question that I have, and I was trying to figure it out and read about it, and it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying it would be easy, but I think with enough...
Well, but everybody on Reddit, it seems to be saying it's very easy.
I imagine if you are able to...
And I was looking at I started looking at the public ledger and what the documentation is on the blocks. And I just don't get it, and nobody has explained it. I've even asked.
Well...
Everybody says it's easy, but nobody can tell me how.
Here's how I would think, is that every time you are accessing the blockchain, you have to do it over through an internet service provider. So an internet service provider has a recognition that you're doing something, so they have an IP address. And I imagine you could correspond the time of a transaction to the time that you accessed the blockchain. What I'm saying is you would need to localize, you'd need to correlate a bunch of variables together, but it is theoretically possible.
You'd need to have access to an ISP's data.
Yes, which the government has.
Right, but then also, if I'm looking at the public ledger, it doesn't even seem clear to me because it doesn't have IP addresses.
No, but it has transaction times that they occurred, and you can,
right, but,
and you
but
can.
So then, like mining all ISP's data to see who was doing anything at that time it's just like an insane amount of data.
Yeah, but I mean, we're talking about the government that has incredible resources.
I have no idea. I don't get it.
I'll read about it and try to get a better answer.
Yeah.
How about that? Because I mean, this is just me speculating. It's probably not worth discussing further, and we're almost out of time anyway. So we should probably talk about Reddit if we want to. And
well, that was actually my main question, because somebody was talking about Bitcoin being confiscated, and to me that even seems like a second step.
Mm-hmm.
And what I could imagine is, like, if you have Bitcoin in Coinbase or Binance or some exchange, that exchange could give up the information that would allow a government to confiscate Bitcoin.
Yes.
But if you have Bitcoin in a wallet, even a software wallet, can't even imagine how they would do that.
Yeah, yes, I think it would be difficult, but they could. I guess
they'd have to like hack into your computer and like see if you have saved keys somewhere.
Well, yes, or I mean, you see the difference though between Monero and Bitcoin, right? Is that it's like with Bitcoin, everything's public, right? You can say this wallet's doing something, as we've said previously. But with Monero, you can't even do that because
but this wallet is an encrypted idea.
That.
It's not like this wallet. I read that and I can say, oh, it's like my neighbor.
But this is why I think you're missing I think this could be why you're missing the point between anonymous and private, because it's just the idea that it's much more difficult to correspond who's doing a transaction if you don't even know that a wallet is doing a transaction, because that's encrypted.
Yeah, sure. I agree that it's harder to know who's doing a transaction if you don't know if the transaction is happening.
I mean, it's the same point of how, like, I guess they got the Silk Road guy because, you know, they found him at a library using the Tor browser, but they found that they got him in the act of doing it, of accessing the Silk Road on the computer. And so I imagine you just would need to maybe do something similar with Bitcoin. But I don't know. I feel like this conversation isn't really a good one because we're both not knowledgeable about it, and we should probably read more about it. Because I take... If a bunch of people on Reddit are saying it, and maybe this isn't a good heuristic, but I do trust the mob in some sense because...
Right. Well, they also said that Julian Assange is wrong.
Well, not everybody, though. They were...
The same people, though. It's the same folks.
Fair enough. Well, if it's the same folks, then okay, that does discredit them.
It's...
Fair enough.
So what I find is it tends to be a tone of people who think that Bitcoin is dumb.
Yes.
And then it's like this Monero thing. If a transaction is happening, some computer has to know that a transaction is happening. Like, if it's happening, it's happening. And so in theory, it is traceable. I understand that in theory, Bitcoin, like, the transactions are traceable.
Mm-hmm. I
just can't imagine how you would reverse an algorithm that has randomness in it. It was my question from the beginning. How can you know the state of a coin before a coin flip? Like, what form of computing will answer that question?
Only a form where you know all variables of the system.
Right.
Because, you know, in theory, if you know the force that you flip a coin with, and you know the air friction and everything like that, you could determine less probable. You could decrease the probability of getting it wrong. But that's, I mean,
sure.
This is kind of where physics ended up, though, is that everything's probabilistic because there's always variables that we can't account for.
Right.
I'm trying to see if they discuss exactly why Bitcoin is so hackable.
In the book?
Mm-hmm. Bitcoin is an interesting hybrid. This is Julian Assange. As the account holders are completely private, and you can create an account at will, but the transactions for the entire Bitcoin economy are completely public. We already talked about that. Yeah. I think it's just the idea that it is easier. It is more transparent than Monero, which wasn't even invented yet, right? It was just, I mean, it was a year later that CryptoNote came out.
Right.
Maybe we should read this. Decoding the mystery. Can Bitcoin be traced back to me? To comprehend the traceability of Bitcoin and the question of whether it can be traced back, one must first understand how transactions work. I mean, we know this. It's basically going into the point that, every address is a conglomeration of, the public keys of the sender and receiver, and then the amount of Bitcoin that's been transacted. So they're not anonymous, they're pseudo-anonymous, which arises from the fact that the identification of users is made by public keys or numerical codes rather than by real names. However, this does not apply that transactions are completely untraceable. So how? So government and corporations are known to keep tabs on financial transactions. With Bitcoin transactions, this surveillance can extend to an individual's purchasing behavior, potentially leading to a breach of privacy. By keeping transactions anonymous, one can avoid when Bitcoin transactions are traceable, they can be used to create a financial profile of the individual. This is what I was saying. You can create a profile, whereas you can't with Monero. This tracking can lead to targeted advertising or differential pricing based on spending habits, blah, blah, blah. We're going to figure this out. You kept pushing on it, so we're figuring this out.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, I have thoughts already, but yeah, I'll wait.
So can Bitcoin be traced back to me? God, this is so repetitive. Connecting the dots between these pseudo-anonymous addresses is typically involved when tracing Bitcoin transactions. Several methods can be used to link Bitcoin addresses to real-world identities. One common approach is through data leaks or breaches from Bitcoin exchanges, as I think you had said, or other services requiring users to provide personal information. If a user's address becomes associated with the real-world identity due to the data breach, all their transactions become traceable. Advanced blockchain analysis software has also been developed to analyze patterns and link Bitcoin addresses. Can Bitcoin be traced back to me? Yes, these tools can identify when a single entity controls multiple addresses by examining patterns in how transactions are made. Even the simple act of spending Bitcoin can potentially lead to a traceable transaction. When users spend Bitcoin, they often have to use multiple addresses to gather enough for the transaction. This grouping of addresses is a clue that they are owned by the same entity, making it more likely that the transactions can be traced back to a single source. Anomalous transaction patterns, blah, blah, blah. While Bitcoin offers more privacy, so measure to increase. Yeah, okay. So, I mean, the point is, this isn't a technical article, but it's basically making the points I was making is that, you can figure this stuff out, because then it goes into how can you sort of prevent against this. You can use crypto mixers, also called tumblers, allow users to mix identifiable cryptocurrency funds, making tracing more complex. You can use secure Wi-Fi. Using a secure Wi-Fi connection is another way of preserving your anonymity when transacting Bitcoin, right? Linux laptop, using a Linux laptop is another effective strategy, I guess. There are versions with privacy in mind. No log VPN, this kind of stuff. But yes, but I'm assuming where it sort of briefly discussed the point of this cryptocurrency analysis software is probably the thing that we would want to read into to get the actual technical understanding of how that's done. Because that seems to be doing some of the, whether it's full decryption, I don't know, but we would need to read that. But that's the point.
It's so all this stuff, having some kind of access to Coinbase, like a backdoor access to Coinbase, makes perfect sense to me, and I completely believe that would be a great way for them to do it because it'd be way easier. It's like you look at the entry on the ledger, And my question is, like, how are they backwards decoding? It's just a single entry. I also understand how
I get it.
you could kind of watch the ledger and try and piece together things that sort of try and do some sleuthing work to associate transactions with each other as a way of trying to say, okay, this person did all these different things, and then use something like your backdoor information on Coinbase did somebody on Coinbase do something at all these times? Aha, it must be them. It's can you backwards...
Yeah, I get it.
Engineer the key itself. Because that's what everybody is talking about.
Is it?
Is these public key is the problem. And to me, it's like, is that what they're using?
But it's...
Because to me, the problem is that you're on Coinbase, that you're using an internet service provider that's giving all of your information, and that these things would be far less decryptable without the fact that your public information is given to every service you're using around the world.
I think that is probably the central issue. And I wouldn't be surprised if some people on Reddit are making that point.
Right.
I don't know how into
because
detail.
Somebody was telling me that like all the truckers in the Canadian protests got their Bitcoin confiscated. And I was trying to ask how.
Yeah.
And then it's like, is it in Coinbase? Sure,
yes.
I buy it.
Yeah.
But like, how in the world would you do that?
Yeah.
Like, how would you get into the Bitcoin wallets or like if somebody had a hardware wallet that's not even attached to anything?
Right.
It's like a QR code. How are you going to steal the Bitcoin off that?
Right. Yeah. I mean, yes. So that's a good point. But I imagine that it is... I guess this is also the idea is whether or not it's been done, it is easier to do than other ways because of the public nature of the ledger, which is why
I think that's
which is
true.
why they let it happen. I mean, this is probably why they let Bitcoin survive, right? It's because it has this public aspect to it and transparent aspect to it, even though, God forbid any banking institution had the amount of transparency. Yeah. Anyway.
The other thing is, with Monero, my beef with it is not that I think it's definitely more encrypted than Bitcoin by a lot. But if I had something and I send it to you, there will be record of that.
I mean,
unless you don't have it.
Well, there's record...
Like, if I have a coin, if I have a piece of paper, and I give it to you... That is, like, quote, in some ways traceable. In similar ways, like talking about habits, talking about, where did you get $1? You just spent $1 or something like that.
Sure.
I think in the same ways that article was describing about some of the methods they use to trace Bitcoin.
But not exactly, because it's, again, the sleuthing methods for associating, because it's not a public blockchain in the same sense, you can't associate things as easily. Or maybe even at all. I don't know. Anyway.
Right. Also, I was reading that because it's not a public blockchain, there's also been like a lot of fraud in it.
In Monero.
But you can't even know. That's the other problem is you can't have any idea if there is or not
fraud.
Right,
and this is the point I made last episode, and actually it was nice to see Assange made the exact point of that you actually need a public aspect to prevent against fraud, or you need a central authority. So you're a rock in the hard place, I suppose.
There's no free lunch.
No, not even with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we'll see how this episode does.
I hope it's the most listened to episode.
Probably. Yeah, we didn't even talk about all the fun trolling that I did. I had fun trolling people that were trolling you on the episode.
Were they trolling me? I don't think they were.
Well, yeah, they were. They were saying, like, this is a stupid post, and it doesn't... what's the point of this post kind of stuff.
I see. But you don't think that was a sincere... You don't think they were sincere?
Well, trolling I'm using fair enough. Maybe I'm using it loosely. But I just mean it probably was sincere, but I was making fun of them back. And it was fun.
Right. Nice.
It was fun. Yeah.
Do you feel like you won?
I do. Yeah, because there was this one guy that kept like saying like how stupid he thought the post was, and then I kept sort of telling him why it wasn't stupid. What's that?
It was funny to me to like think of posts as that stupid and just engage.
Yeah, they kept engaging, but they never answered my stuff, and so I just kept like responding to them snarkily.
Right.
And they were like, it took me, because we got into like P equals NP stuff. You know, it was like, do you even know anything about P equals NP? And then I told them that I do, and then they went and commented on another person's thing, and were like, it took me polynomial time to figure out that this post had nothing to do. And then I said it took you NP time to come up with that response. I was very proud of that. It took me NP time as well, to be fair. Also took non-polynomial time, but anyway.
Polynomial.
Okay, yeah. Cool. So I guess we doing Das Kapital? Or do you want to try to find something on the...
I still don't have Ben's book.
That's weird. Or do you want to try to find something on...
I've contacted Amazon customer service. They're like, it'll be there soon.
Or do you want to try to find something on the Tor browser to finish this up?
I don't know. Let's do Das Kapital. Okay. Let's get into it.
Cool.
I'm sure we will be at each other's throats on this.
Probably.
I kind of feel like it. I have a feeling.
Or we'll...
I have a feeling I'm going to agree with everything Mark said.
Yeah, I'm sure you will.
Yeah.
So, okay, cool. I guess we'll talk about which parts to read off air.
Yeah.
See ya.
All right.
Okay. That was a long episode.